The spells from swords and rings have always been desired by the players, but since the blacksmith rework, we can have spells on all slots without having the stats penalty, so let's see how you can use them in your build. There are two kinds of spells in the game. The first one is the damage or offensive spells. They are on rings and weapons and come in two variants. Single target, those are the double attacks and elemental blows, and area of effect, that hit all the enemies from the wave. Double attack spells from the sword appear like two critical strikes in a row. The damage written on the spell represents the total of the two back-to-back attacks divided into 35% and 65%. The spells on the rings have their total damage divided into even more tiny hits. The elemental blows and the ring spells have their own special animations. The second type of spells are the buffs. There is one for every attribute. The non-elemental rings and swords give an attack buff of 50%. Dex improve the hit by 75%. Belts increase the speed by 75%, and chest the defense by 50%. Here are some important aspects. You can only cast one spell per round. I consider a round one of your attacks. In the round you cast a spell, you don't do your normal attack, so if you cast a buff, you do 0 damage. The buffs last for a number of rounds. Those are counted based on the attacks your character does. How much he gets hit doesn't matter. As far as I can tell, the buffs can't refresh themselves while they are active, so you'll always have some rounds without them. The damage spells do not benefit from the combo system, so they don't get increased damage and crit chance. Some spells have a cooldown, so they can't happen multiple times in a row. For example, the damaging spells from the rings have a cooldown of a few rounds, but the swords do not. The enemy defense actually influences the damage done. The final damage dealt represents the skill damage minus the defender's defense, that's multiplied by the elemental correction and by the critical correction if it's the case. Spells and hit. Spells cannot miss, and the choice of your character action is made before the hit roll. So, in principle, that means that if your character relies heavily on offensive spells, you can get away with less hit than one based on attack. But take into consideration that the normal attacks still do quite some damage, so hit is still important. Now let's see how the chance to proc is actually calculated. In case you expected it to be straightforward, I'm sorry, it is not. That percentage you see on the spell is quite far from the actual chance of casting it. You can think of what action your character will do in a round as a lottery. Let's say a Wheel of Fortune. Each single spell you equip gets added to the pool of possible results. Your basic normal attack is there to start with a huge chance to happen. 100. So each and every chance to proc gets added to the pool and one number is extracted. And whatever action is tied to that number happens. So they don't add up to a max of 100, the pool just keeps on growing and the real percentage is the amount that proc fills the pool. Let's see how this works. If the player has no spells, he has 1 of 100 chances to do a normal attack. Once he adds a sword with, let's say, 50 chance, he will have 50 out of 150, so 43 chance, to cast that spell, and 100 out of 150, so 66% for a normal attack. If that sword would have a 100 stated chance to cast, it would actually happen only 50% of the time. Even an item with 200 chance to cast would in practice only happen 200 out of 300, so 66% of the time. Another practical example, an old +10 magma ring has a stated proc chance of 18%, but in reality, if it's the only spell equipped, it has a 15% chance. If the player is also using a spell sword with 46% chance, the magma ring now has an under 11% chance. So if you care about doing one specific effect, having a ton of other spells is not helping much. But if you add more spells, you get a bigger chance of doing something special instead of a normal attack. This is how having spells upgraded at +7 on all the slots would look like. As you can see, you would still do normal attacks half the time. So what spells should you use? As long as you have an item with all the attributes and the spell, it's probably okay to use it. But I'd say there is a big exception, if you are using one of the old spell swords. Those do a ton of damage, so I personally not wear too many other spells around them, so that they can proc more often. The big exception would be a nice speed belt with a speed buff. And I might also add an area of effect spell on the ring for some campaign stages. I'd also avoid having too many spells in the arena. As I said at the start, each round you cast a buff means you do 0 damage, and the battles are too short to count on the buffs to proc and to be around enough to matter. On my 0 NCG project, the new spells made a huge difference. I got from 157 to 177 and I'm still going, just waiting for some crafts to finish. But I must confess that the battles are very random. If the defense and speed buffs happen early, I might get 3 stars. If not, I might die at only 1. In conclusion, the spells are very strong, worth using, and most likely will be needed in order to beat the new stages. Just take into consideration that in the arena, having too many might not work that great. And also don't forget that the real chance of doing a spell is way lower than it seems. Thanks for grinding with me, and see you next time.